The burden of what it means to operate and run a school means that you have to sort of pull the wool over everyone's eyes to keep your job. And so I decided that I didn't want to do that. I was going to take the risk of not knowing what I was talking about, but be honest about it and try to build into someone who knew what they were talking about. Most of these other interventions like drilling or the explicit talking and all the explicit technique is not necessary. And I'm arguing not only is it not necessary, largely it's ineffective for what it says it does. I'm not calling John Dan around specifically, but he says a person needs knowledge to start learning. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. If we needed knowledge to start learning, who learned the first thing? If we guide all of our effects towards the invariant features that are present in the environment, within task, about the individual, I think our practice become more sound and salient. There's no arguing that. He put in the work to be as skillful at the belly up open guard as he is. What I'm saying, he doesn't know shit about coaching.
Greg, welcome to the podcast. We got there in the end.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you guys having me on.
No, it's a pleasure, and thanks for making the time for us. We've been looking forward to chatting to you for a little while.
Great, man. I've been looking forward to it too. I always love a good conversation.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good, and it's one of these situations where I was thinking how to approach this conversation with you, because I'm mindful that this isn't your first podcast. You've done many podcasts, and you seem like a very passionate but very patient man, because despite the constant confusion from people, you're always kind enough to recite the same information and go through the same detail. So apologies in advance. It's probably going to be a similar podcast to some degree in that respect, because we are a couple of ignorant Brits and we are going to be asking you the same sort of questions.
I don't mind that at all, man. I mean, that's the point. If I can't make people understand, it's a problem with me and the clarity of my speech. So I'll keep practicing until I get it right.
Yeah, thank you. So let's just kick off with the obvious question around what is ecological dynamics of learning. I understand it's a wider science, isn't it? So tell us what that is in your view.
So really, it's just a theoretical framework for trying to understand why behavior is what and the way it is. It's this thing that we do, and we're trying to figure out, why does one behavior look one way, or why does one intervention cause behavior to shift in this direction or that direction? And ecological dynamics is a view by which we look at how someone's perception of the world affects their action in the world, and how their action in the world affects their perception in the world, and how these two things are inextricably linked. And it's through the interaction of these two things that behavior seems to emerge. And there are mechanisms within perception and action that affect behavior in one way or another. So it's just a theoretical framework trying to understand those relationships.
Okay, so from what you say there, it sounds like it's largely to do with behaviors. I mean, how does that play a role in learning?
Well, we're talking about sport. We're talking about physical behavior. We're talking about why a person takes a physical action to produce one outcome or another. And so anytime we're talking about sports, we're talking about behavior.
And where was, again, I think you've probably cited this before, but where did the kind of the science of this come from? Where was like the original literature, and in what field was it designed or discovered in?
Well, it's been a thing that's been happening for a while. I mean, so depending on who you talk to and what you think about the nature of perception and how we get information from the world, you'll have a few different starting points. I mean, Ponte is one person that people think kind of originated these ideas about the holistic nature of the task individual environment system as interacting to create behavior. William James, who was an American pragmatist, or within the pragmatist traditions, that kind of was at the forefront of this thought about how we have to look at behavior as being a more holistic thing. But the main person that I look for in the past to guide my understanding of this is really two people. It's Nikolai Bernstein, who was a Russian researcher who discovered the degrees of freedom problem as a way to look at why behavior might look one way or another. And the other is J.J. Gibson, who's another researcher who coined the term the ecological approach.
Okay. And before jiu-jitsu, I mean, what sports is it popular in? Do you know?
I don't know which sport it originally arose in and which it's the most popular, but you see it in a wide range. I mean, right now in America, we have coaches from an ecological dynamics or ecological psychological framework, working in basketball, working in baseball. We have it in proper football or soccer.
Yeah. Proper football, you're right.
Yeah, proper football. So yeah, it's in a lot of fields. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did a little bit of Googling and was trying to find out a bit more information about it ahead of this conversation. And yeah, basketball kept popping up. So yeah, I thought it might be used there for sure. Hey, grapplers, we are now sponsored by X Marshall.
X Marshall have sent us some new quality British design rash guards. These are just the British designs, but they do loads and loads of really cool designs. You know, they got the OnlyFans ones, they got the Hillbilly ones, they got the Pornhub ones, they got all the
Yeah, Game of Chokes.
They got all that sort of stuff, which to be honest, you just don't see anywhere else.
Yeah, 100%. And they also specialize in not just no-gi, but also Muay Thai as well. So if you're cross-training and you want to pick up some Thai boxing shorts, then that's the place to go as well.
Genuinely really do like them. I think they feel really nice. That's what I like about them. They feel really nice. They got the band at the bottom, you know, and yeah, I've took them for a spin and they sweat up quite nicely.
And better yet, guys, we've managed to secure a really good discount for our audience. So if you use our link below, then you get an automatic 15% off of everything on their website.
Get that up, look, so they can see that shit.
The constraints led approach. I mean, how, like, again, apologies if I'm asking dumb questions.
No, they're good. They're fun.
So we're talking about sort of behavior and learning, and then the constraints approach to that. Is that one and the same thing, or is that like an additional component to that?
Yeah, I know these are all like confusing words, all these people, all these terms, blah, blah, blah. So an ecological approach is just sort of starting with J.J. Gibson's idea of what that means. And it really just means that as an organism performs tasks in an environment, those three component parts are non-parsable, meaning they are the system from which behavior emerges. And part of that individual task environment system is the perception action loop. This is, perception action continuously and constantly affecting each other. From that loop, we have the idea of direct perception. And this is J.J. Gibson's big idea, that the information that we need to move or act comes directly from and through the interaction with our environment. And that this information does not need to be represented or interpreted by the brain. And so this was the original idea that all the future researchers sort of kind of sprung from, whether they agreed or disagreed. Among the researchers that kind of birthed from that idea were two, Keith Davids and Ian Renshaw. And they're the two researchers who created the constraints-led approach. And this was an approach that took direct perception as being true, and they used it to talk about how the things we do might affect us. And they called the things that we do or the things that we manipulate in this system constraints. And so as a way to change behavior, these two researchers were trying to figure out how to manipulate the constraints present in this system as a way to affect future behaviors.
So for my dumbass, right, I'm thinking here, right, I'm trying to follow this as best I can.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's cool. I'm just thinking for like our listeners at home and absolute idiots like me, right? So when you're talking about all this stuff, you're talking about the action of the sport. So with jiu-jitsu, you're talking about actually like live rolling sparring. If it was football, you're talking about them playing training matches rather than drills, yeah? And then when you're talking about constraints, you're talking about taking away certain elements to make change behaviors to make them do certain things, yeah?
Well, yeah. Let's talk about it just more as behavior first, because I think that's the big confusion. People separate sport and think it's a magical thing, like it's different than walking or jumping or running. Now, walking and jumping and running by themselves are simpler activities versus the complex nature of bodies and interacting on a field or in a grappling match.
Yeah.
But the simple idea is constraints. These are things that limit options. So imagine if I wanted to reach for a cup and one of my hands was tied behind my back, for example. This would affect the way that I reach out for the cup, whichever hand I had left. So basically tying my hand behind my back is constraining the possible ways in which I can reach for that cup. So I, for example, have no longer the option of reaching with two hands. So the behavior that would come out of of me reaching for a cup would be directly affected by my hand being tied behind my back. Now, constraints aren't special manipulations like the one I just gave. Constraints are always present. Like, for example, your previous experiences, who you are as a person, your height, your psychological inclinations, these are all constrained behavior. So again, the idea of constraints affecting behavior is present everywhere. The CLA is a way that we try to use those to manipulate, sport skills or sporting outcomes. So if we had to change the behavior on the field, what might we want to limit or take away to affect where the behavior goes?
Okay, so on this, like, I kind of understand that now. So just thinking of jiu-jitsu specific, could you just give me an example so I can get it like a little bit clearer in my head?
Yeah, let's say, for example, we want to learn how to pass the guard, which is a complex thing. There's many moving parts. There's many ways and reasons and things surrounding why or how we do it. So if we want to teach a new learner how to start this process, what could we manipulate to help them start searching the space or the whole landscape of possibilities to start developing a skill that would lead to ultimately the ability to pass the legs? So what would have to be done with a new player interacting with another player? First thing, with live resistance, no any other intervention other than playing the game, what could we constrain within the task, individual, and environment system to help them start developing a behavior? And a simple answer would be bottom player, try to put your feet on top player, try to use your hands and keep bottom player's feet off of you. Now, the reason we would choose this as an intervention is one, it's live, so we're both interacting in real time. While struggling, we're making decisions, we're picking up information that is relevant to the whole game that will eventually be played, but in a small little portion. It allows the students to focus on things that must happen in order for guard passing to ultimately happen, which would be, for the top player, keeping legs off of you, or a portion of the leg, in this case the feet, as a way to start initiating the process. And the bottom player gets to experience trying to put their feet on the top player, which is a fight that happens in the whole game as it's played. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that actually does. Yeah. I was just trying to make it clear for everyone because there was a lot of big words flying around.
Yeah, no problem. So again, we don't have to use big words. Okay, the language of analysis and the language of coaching are two different languages. Yeah. So if we're talking about CLA, if we're talking about ecological dynamics, I might have to use an academic word because these words mean something in that sphere. But for a coach in jiu-jitsu, these words literally mean nothing to the student.
Yeah,
and we don't have to use them.
No, it's good. It's good to hear both sides because I understood what you're saying, but I was struggling to understand how that like fit into jiu-jitsu, if that makes sense a little bit.
For sure. Yeah.
What is your background, Greg? Because you're right that it does sound quite academic and very sciencey the way that you initially explained things. Are you an academic by background?
No, I barely went to high school.
Okay.
Again, my GPA was of a failing average. I missed 40 days a semester. I barely went to school. I hated it. And so when I stopped high school, I didn't go any further. I was working as like an auto mechanic, a porter. I was installing audio visual equipment in people's houses. I worked at a video store. I didn't do anything. And then I found jiu-jitsu, and I've been on the mats for 20 years since.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe missed a call in there, mate, just saying.
No, I think about it like this. Everyone thinks that education has to be this traditional thing. It's like I developed an interest in grappling. And so grappling became the medium through which I looked at the world. And there are many aspects to grappling, both, being an athlete, watching athletes, being a coach, watching coaches. There's all these different facets of our community. And so I just decided to study a few different aspects of what we do, namely the physics of why things happen and the process of trying to get people to make things happen.
Yeah. And why did you go down this path? Because obviously the traditional or typical way of instructing jiu-jitsu that you see is I teach a student how my coach taught me how to do a movement, and you give them autonomy, but you give them a technique. You obviously talk them through the various steps, maybe with a few nuances that you can maybe do it this way or this way. You're trying to get from A to B, and then you might do some isolation sparring, and that's typically how you teach. I mean, what led you away from that traditional way of teaching down this path of this ecological approach?
Well, I think first is like, I'm a skeptic who's never satisfied. I mean, that's just my base nature. So when I first started teaching, I realized that I might not know how to do it. Like, why would I do it any way versus another way? What is my reason? So when I decide to make a student warm up, why do we warm up? Why do I choose these exercises as the warm up exercises? When I show a technique, why am I showing this technique? Why does my student need to know this? Am I saying it the right way? Is me saying it what's actually going to help them get better? Or do I show it? Do I show it once? Do I show it twice? What am I doing? And so rather than a bunch of answers, I had a bunch of questions. So I decided to look into those questions. Like, do I actually know what the fuck I'm doing? And the answer is no. But I think most people don't know what they're doing. I think the burden of what it means to operate and run a school means that you have to sort of pull the wool over everyone's eyes to keep your job. And so I decided that I didn't want to do that. I was going to take the risk of not knowing what I was talking about, but be honest about it and try to build into someone who knew what they were talking about.
And that journey of exploration, was that again around how to transfer information and best learn information?
Yeah. So basically, I started just fucking around on the internet. Like, what is behavior? What is learning? How to coach? Who's the best coach? What's the best way to teach something? And as I started poking around, I came across many different researchers and people who taught. And I bumped into this thing called self-organization. And I was like, oh, that seems interesting. And so I started reading about it, and it was very convincing. And initially, just even reading about the idea, I immediately drew a parallel to watching beginners do something. And I was like, wow, that's why people might look messy. Maybe they're just self-organizing. Maybe it's the body learning. That messiness isn't actually wrong. Maybe that is learning. And so that just made me curious. So I kept going down that rabbit hole, and I bumped into, the field of ecological psychology or ecological dynamics. I keep using those there's two different words because we can call either. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Okay. And a question that I think, because we've spoken to many people on this podcast, and a couple use the ecological system, and we've kind of had this question a couple of times. But how does it differ to isolation sparring? Because isolation sparring, it's again constrained because you're saying this is the position, this is the outcome.
Right. So situational sparring is our best guess at what we might want to do to solve a problem. So it makes tons of sense. If I want to learn how to arm lock my opponent and I'm a brand new person and we're starting on the feet, getting from the feet to a position where I could potentially arm lock someone is a very complex and long drawn out path. So for new players, this almost has no relevance, because how do I get from showing something to them doing something in a very specific position? That's a very hard path. So anyway, people realize that, well, we can't do that. So we have to start somebody in the position closest to what we're trying to get them to learn if they're new, to try to give them exposure to this process, which is great. We've done it forever. But there's something more that's going on. So for example, if we know that getting close to something leads us easier to the path of achieving something, well, what else is blocking us from achieving that end? What else would a person have to do in order to constrain their environment? Is it just the situation itself? Or is it the day that we're performing it on? Or is it who we're performing it on? Or is it the tasks we're trying to use to get there? There are many other things in that environment that we can manipulate beyond just the situation. But if you don't know what component parts affect the quality of behavior, then you don't really know what to manipulate when the shit hits the fan. So the situation is just a starting point. There's more than just the situation.
And another thing that I'm often curious about, and I'm curious because I'm really interested in this way of learning, by the way.
Yeah.
I've drilled and learned techniques for many years, and I'm frankly a little bit bored of it. So this excites me, this style of learning for sure. But another question that comes up is, and we talked to Kit Dale a while ago, who kind of learned in a very similar way from what I can understand. And when we were chatting to him, he explained that he would go to class, he wouldn't really get involved with techniques. He'd do a bit of live training. He'd then sit on the side of the mat and he'd really analyze it and he'd ponder it. He'd sit in his car for an hour after training, think about it the whole way home, go to his factory job where he didn't have to think about anything else and continue pondering and thinking about these problems. And then we'd go back to training and then start figuring out more problems from there. And that sounds great if you've got time and mental bandwidth to kind of explore these things in your head. So the question that I've got, I'm an example where I'm a busy parent. I'm basically a hobbyist when I train these days. I do my, maybe 3 sessions a week. And outside of that, I spend a little bit of time thinking about jiu-jitsu, but there's a lot of other stuff rattling around up here as well. It feels like a little bit like if you don't have a lot of mental bandwidth and time to go through a practice and then go away and kind of really think about it and recall it a lot to really embed that information. And also if your training's a little bit staggered, it feels like the progression therefore might be quite hindered or slow.
Yeah. Why is that wrong? Why is that bad?
I guess this is where I wonder if someone just taught me a load of techniques, would I learn quicker?
No. So I think, well, here's a couple things I think about when you say that. So one is what it means to have someone tell you something. There's nothing wrong with that. Having conversation about what's going on and being inspired by the words or experiences of others is part of the ecological process. Your friends, your culture, the people you interact with, all affect what you see in the world and how you see it. So I think these conversations, these sharing of techniques, it's completely valuable. The thing that I am thinking about is how much value does it has in comparison to the other interventions we can use to start initiating and understanding and performing behaviors. Because it's more than just, hey, let me show you this, right? And so we can't just be stuck in the field of, hey, let me just show you this. Now, the reason I think we're addicted to this is because of how fluid the intellect is. The intellect loves to hear answers because it makes you feel like you know it. All you have to do is remember. Just take the note. It'll be yours. But what we fail to realize is the person that's giving you that answer oftentimes had to dig through the shit to find it. And the reason they can deliver it to you so easily is because they spent the time developing a true understanding of what things are. That's why they're able to regurgitate it to you. But if you just remember what they said, do you really know anything? Now, your mind doesn't know the difference. It just feels good to be told what to do. Now, on the other side of things, the trial and error process feels daunting. Just like you said, you got a kid, you got other shit going on. You don't want to think about jiu-jitsu 24 hours a day. But that's the price we pay to be good at anything. And I think that because we are a pedestrian community, we are a hobbyist community at large, we want the fruits of our labor to come easier than they actually do. You know, we're fooled by our own desire to have the quick answer tomorrow. And then we just build a system that supports that emotional need. And then we've been living in response to it ever since its inception.
It's so against the grain, isn't it? You know, it's like you go to most jiu-jitsu schools in probably the world and they're drilling and they're doing this. But I actually do like, I actually train a lot of live drilling. So during the days I train at our club and we do like maybe 10 minutes of maybe a small technique, but then we go straight into like just live rolls and just drilling. And I genuinely think I've only been training just over 2 years, but I genuinely think that mat time has helped me massively. It's made me like, you know, go ahead of people in my opinion and just I don't know, I think jiu-jitsu is very much like you got to feel it. I say this to people all the time. You've got to feel that technique, got to feel the move. You got to feel what other people feel like in certain situations. And I think if you skip that and you're just drilling all the time. So if you do like 45 minutes of drilling, some off the wall work and maybe 2 rounds at the end, and then you're doing that 3 times a week, I genuinely agree. I don't think you're going to get to where you want to be anytime soon. I feel if you were to do a lot more rolling and a lot more, you know, interactive stuff, I genuinely think you get better quicker.
And you do. And this is the strangest thing that people charge me with all the time is they tell me what's possible, what's not possible. But I'm telling you, this is the only way we train our students. From day one to DeAndre Corby, like we only do live work and we don't use explicit instruction. We don't use any drilling. We don't use any traditional methodology to acquire these skills. None of my students. And they all perform extremely well. And they only just perform well, but the amount of skills they acquire in a short period of time and is large. And no matter how much I tell people, yeah, this is what I do at my gym every day. It's like they seem to kind of skip over it. Like, oh, no. And I'm like, I don't know what else.
So with that, obviously you're doing your live rolling and everything else. But so are you ever troubleshooting problems? So say like a student comes to you and goes, oh, I can't get this arm bar. Are you then going, you know, this is how you do it? Like, you know, if I'm just thinking of more, you know, leg entanglements or berimbolos or something, you know, fairly a bit more technical. You know, I find like obviously live rolling is great for how you feel and how to pin people in a lot of obviously like the more important moves it really in jiu-jitsu. But I think like specifically sometimes to learn a berimbolo, for example, or something really technical, I feel like I need to be shown that as well as the live training.
So when we say shown, what do you mean by shown?
So literally like I don't know. So if I was to, I don't know, do a berimbolo, we were doing it last week, and it was like I was putting my foot in the wrong position, and then I had to cup under his, like C grip under his armpit to get it correctly and things like that. Like I had to be shown those specific moves to be able to get it. And I don't genuinely think, maybe if I was doing it all the time, but I don't think I would have been able to get those like special specific grips in the bits and pieces that I needed just by live rolling.
So when you got those special specific grips and you did the berimbolo, does it work every time?
No.
Then what good was the specific thing they told you?
So it would work, but not every time. You know, it's like any jiu-jitsu move that would,
Right.
work every time, will it?
So then if it doesn't work, what do you change? If the C grip fails, if the specific angle they gave you fails, if the specific foot position gives you fails, and then you look at your instructor and say, hey, what other foot positions can I play with? And they don't know, what do you do then?
Well, at that point, I just got crushed because I was inverted on my head. But yeah, no, I know what you're trying to say. Yeah, because obviously, like jiu-jitsu, I always think as well with jiu-jitsu, what I always ask about is the bits in between, and that's what I always think about. So you have your moves, you have your guard pass. I want to show you a guard pass, but I always find jiu-jitsu has a lot of this, I don't know, like grey area of movement and patterns and things and just things that you naturally end up doing by rolling more. And I'm always interested to pick people's brains on that part rather than the actual pass.
Because that's actually grappling. So that's you're witnessing the actual thing. When you see the mess, when you see the gray area, when you see the struggle, the stuff that's not really right but turns into something, that's the meat. That's the important stuff. What you realize, if you look at it long enough, is these moves that you specifically can name where all these conditions are met and present, create an opportunity for a highly specific outcome. That's the tiniest piece. That's the salt. You know what I mean? And so the problem isn't someone showing someone a berimbolo. The problem is somebody showing someone a berimbolo and trying to use them showing that and drilling it as an excuse to develop skills that lead to that. But if I were to ask you, but for a simple example, what's the first skill anyone in the world would have to learn to start grappling? The very first thing, because it would lead to berimbolo. Seriously. I mean, you get, and don't be afraid to be wrong, because you'll be training for 2 years. You're not a black belt. I can't embarrass you.
I'm just thinking, right, so what, the first thing you'd learn? I don't know.
Getting hold of someone, I guess.
Just engaging. Just engaging someone. Like, that was a big thing. I remember when we first rode, so Paul was one of the first people to get me into jiu-jitsu. And I remember he I laid on the floor and he just went, oh, fuck. I forgot you don't even know what's happening. And I was like, mate, I ain't got a clue. And that initial engagement, I think, is obviously a big part of it, isn't it?
Okay. Yeah. It's everything. So when you first engage initially, let's give it more specific. Let's say you're a top player passing and a bottom player trying to use their guard. Even before you even start to touch each other, or even as you touch each other, what's the first thing both players really have to be able to do?
Manage distance.
Even before that, it's something that's present while we're interacting and right before we're interacting. It's always present, but no one ever talks about it. No one ever names it. I wonder if you guys can name it.
Well, just looking at each other. I don't know.
Yeah. Face your opponent. And so what we won't realize is that when we first start to engage, start to touch each other, we're trying to move around each other. We're trying to get angles. We're trying to change heights. We're trying to get to vulnerable parts of the body. And typically when you watch beginners, they try to run around each other. And what's interesting is they're actually choosing the right thing to do, because that is the most vulnerable thing. You ever watch like a new guard passer? They'll stand, they'll try to like fake each other out and go left and right. They have the right answer right away. They know exactly what they need to be doing. They just haven't attuned to the information or coordinated a pattern that they can use to do that. But they see, and they don't know how they see it. They don't know why they see it. They couldn't explain it to you, but they do it. And so really, that's the first thing. So we develop tasks and situations where they get to experience how to keep each other in front of each other, or how to try to keep someone in front of you while you go around them. And that's really one of the first things we have to engage with if we want to start teaching people how to start from a non-connected to a connected position. And people are worried about berimbolos. Most motherfuckers can't even face each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that.
So what does your because I think you've got a foundation program, right? And then the guys would go into the all levels from there. So what does that look like? Because again, just trying to compare to traditional learning of jiu-jitsu, where you have your fundamental techniques, your shrimp, your bridge, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So what does your foundation look like? What do you think the brand new people need to cover in regard to scenarios and games and that sort of thing?
So first, no single movement is fundamental. There's no such thing as a fundamental human movement. There's no such thing. There are fundamental conditions, right? And they're guided by one of three things. So this is not my language. This is a researcher named Carl Newell's language. So object interaction, postural control, and locomotion. And now I've changed these words to make them more digestible in the jiu-jitsu sphere. So you have to be able to connect to your opponent, you have to be able to structure relative to your partner, and you have to be able to move relative to your partner. And so what we do fundamentally is we teach people how to connect to, structure relative to, and move relative to one another based on the constraints of the game that we play. So I created a framework to describe this more easily. So the first skill that we learn in the foundations class is to make and maintain connection. This is basically just connecting to a body to do something to it. And so all the situations that we play from and all the tasks that are given are to help people develop the skills of making and maintaining connection to each other for whatever reason we want to make and maintain connection. Now, my framework goes further. We make and maintain connection to manage distance, right? Because grappling is about either gap closing or denying gap closure. We have to get closer to each other. And so we make and maintain connection to manage distance. And while doing that, we try to destabilize each other. This is to make each other fall around and the body to get all broken up. We make the skill of segmentation. This is when we are presented with limbs. We have to get closer to the body by moving the limbs out of the way in their segments. We have isolation. This is making and maintaining connections and trying to get limbs away from everything else so they become vulnerable to attack. And then finally, we have immobilization. This is when we make and maintain connections to hold the body or parts of the body still. And that's my creation. So, and everything that we do is guided by that framework. So, if I want to learn how to arm lock, well, the first thing we do is we show the student what an arm lock is, because without context, the information means nothing. And so right after we show it, we put people in that situation and we tell them to hold each other still while the other person is given a task to not be held still. And they can start developing that right away, both an understanding and the capacity to do within the same moment.
Yeah, okay. It sounds like a great framework to sort of start from. And there's obviously all of those things that you mentioned can be done from so many different angles.
Yep.
So, I don't know, sort of chest to back, chest to chest, north, south. Do you have like within that framework, do you cycle around the different angles or?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So no one angle is more important than another, because if you were to look at it, there are infinite angles that you can start at, right? So we only call pins chest to chest or chest to back. Now, if we shortcut it and we say the mount, we only do that after the shared experience is had. So if I'm teaching a new student about the mount, for example, we would say, okay, today we're going to be working on chest to chest pinning. The specific alignment we're going to be working from is when we're on top covering our opponent's hips. This is called the mounted position. So from the mounted position, this is a chest-to-chest pin where we're going to try to, and then I would give a task or an objective or something like that. So that way, they get to experience it. We're calling it what it actually is, which is a chest-to-chest pin, and then we're giving it a specific alignment, which is called the mount. So they have sort of this like reference point to refer back to what they're doing later on when they want to revisit that situation again and train from it. But the most important thing we try to convey to our students is that no matter what we call things, everything is functional. We're doing this for a reason. And then the reason is baked into those tasks and those objectives.
What's the reaction of people when they come into your academy for the first time expecting to learn maybe jiu-jitsu that they've seen on the TV or on YouTube, and they get this framework?
They're all shocked. Because most people have never been held down for 6 minutes their very first time doing anything. So just the nature, because really what we're teaching people when they first come in isn't techniques, it's fighting. So we're teaching the competitive struggle. This is what it feels like to perform this game. This person is going to try to do something to you against your will, and you're going to try to do the same thing to them. So if we can't convey that message right away, we can't teach techniques, because techniques manifest from this struggle. And so if we can't get them to engage in and enjoy the struggle, we don't have a student. And so that's the first thing that I try to teach at my school.
And do you have, you obviously have your kind of blank canvas walk through the door, right? So someone who's never done grappling or jiu-jitsu or anything. And then I imagine you've probably got people that come in and that have maybe learned jiu-jitsu through techniques and drilling and that sort of thing. Do you have a student base that has a mixture of both?
Oh yeah, so we separate our class into 3 levels. Foundations. This is designed for guy walking off the street to about 2 years of experience. We have the all levels. This is 2 years until forever, and then we have the comp crew, which is a select group of people. And the competition crew only really trains with the competition crew. They don't touch anybody else because they have a schedule they have to keep, and we have standards to be on that team. And if you don't meet those standards, you cannot be part of the team. So touching them is going to be a very different experience for a new player versus a new player touching a new player. So we like to try to keep the archetypes together. So, people come to jiu-jitsu for many different reasons. And even though we do nothing but live work and we really focus on getting better at the game, we still want people to have a comfortable enough environment to start approach learning. Because if it's too uncomfortable, you're probably not going to enjoy the learning process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if somebody came to your school for the first time and they're already a blue or a purple belt, would they need to go through that foundation?
No, not at all. But here's the interesting thing: they all do. And what ends up happening is they come in and they're like, "Oh, I've trained before." I was like, "Cool. Just why don't you come to the foundation class, give it a shot, see if you like the gym." "Oh, can I train with the comp guys?" "Yeah, sure. We'll be here at 7:00 in the morning. Let's just go." And then you're a purple belt who's come from a local school. You're pretty good. You've trained for 6 years. You've won a competition or two. 7:00 in the morning, you get to touch DeAndre. By the end of that hour, you're questioning whether you ever did jiu-jitsu before or not. And so this is sort of what happens. And then they're like, "Oh, can I come to the foundations class?" "Yeah, come on, man."
What's the frequency of training as well? Like how many hours a day those comp guys do they train?
Oh, so right now we've experimented with a bunch of different frequencies and volumes, a bunch of different intensities, and we wax and wane relative to how much recovery is needed for the group, or are we preparing for a performance setting like a competition? That will change the frequency and volume. But typically, my guys train for 1 hour a day or less.
That's what, an hour a day? That's it?
Yeah, 40 minutes to an hour.
But you got to bear in mind that our hour, a traditional hour, is probably how much chit chat, how much sat doing nothing, watching, right?
Yeah,
I imagine
that's right.
Greg's is very different.
You guys probably only train for 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Well, I'm lucky. I train during the day, which is pretty much rolling. Like today, I've done 45, 50 minutes of just rolling.
But a traditional evening
class.
But
yeah, an evening class, yeah. Like we would do, or even that, 15 minutes of grappling.
Danny, when you go back to your instructor, hug them, okay? Because they're doing you a good service.
Steve will love that, mate. Yeah, we do. He does. He does do a bit of technique now and again, but he might just run over something that he sees people struggling with. A lot of the like white belts, and he'll be like, "Oh, we'll just do this today." We do like 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. That's maybe once a week, twice a week, maybe, and then the rest of it is just like literally rolling. So it's great. It's good fun.
Well, here's a hot take, and if you ever clip this or people hear this, the Reddit's going to blow up. But the real thing is those interventions don't really matter. Like when he says, "Oh, here's this," fine, that's good, as long as most of what you're doing is live work. He might say something that, though it might not be an optimized model or it might not be an optimized way to communicate what's going on, it may inspire you to try things differently, which could in turn turn into a new action for you. So interaction is healthy and necessary. What I'm arguing is not that it isn't. What I'm arguing is that there's a more optimized way to do that that we can learn to do. But either way, at least you're doing mostly live work, and that's the good thing.
Yeah. So it's like I understand exactly what you're saying, but for example, like over the last, say, like 2 weeks, we've been just focusing on like when he's been doing something, it's been something from turtle. And then we've been working on like, I don't know, an anaconda, a darce, or a Peruvian neck toy, different variables from that same movement. So he's been doing like 15 minutes of a darce, then we've just been rolling, and then he's been like asking people what they're struggling with. And then the next day he'll kind of go, 15 minutes of like anaconda, and then again. But I quite like what he's trying to do because at the moment, I definitely felt that was like a bit of a weak point of my game. Like if someone was turtling, I was trying to, I don't know, I could hold them, but again, like attacks from turtle, should I say, was a bit of a problem. But like now, doing it for 2 weeks, I feel like just just that, and then repping those drills over and over again. Like live rolling after doing
for sure.
just a small amount of technique. It's helped me loads. I've been catching loads of people in anacondas, Darcy's, all those, because I've been purposely trying to put people in that position, and then just autistically
that's exactly right.
out.
So what you're doing is you're getting exposure to the problem, not the solution. And so that's really good. That's a great starting point. So put your students in the problem situation and give them something to do from there. That's plenty for a regular person, right? Because that's all you need. Then over the 2 weeks, you get a little bit of feedback. Hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? Okay, get back into the problem, try again. That's learning. That's what it looks like. So it's good. It sounds like your instructor, is kind of in the right wheelhouse, trying to get you going somewhere.
Yeah, well, our instruction during the day is very different to our evening structure. So our evening structure is definitely like is drilling for what, an hour, 45 minutes, hour of like technique
for
drilling.
An hour?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah,
Holy
45
shit.
minutes, an hour. Yeah. and then we do like 15 minutes of like wall work, and then rolling pretty much like 3 or 4 rounds at the end. That's pretty much a structure in an hour and a half session.
Okay. Sorry. I'm trying to change it, guys. I'm trying to change it.
In fairness though, like, again, to defend that, like, I feel like I enjoy the daytime, but again, I do enjoy learning, again, the nuances, but at the same time, I do understand. I don't know. I'm like stuck in between it, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like the hybrid of both is definitely helping me, if that makes sense. But
for sure,
I can definitely say if I was to choose one, I would choose the daytimes, only because I find them more enjoyable. I find like actually just live rolling more enjoyable. If you said to me you can do an hour and a half of technique or an hour of rolling, every time I would be like, yeah, fuck it, let's roll.
Yeah. And the thing is, that's the kind of what I'm trying to help everyone understand, is that you don't actually have to do all this other stuff. Most of these other interventions like drilling or the explicit talking and all the explicit technique is not necessary. And I'm arguing not only is it not necessary, largely it's ineffective for what it says it does. There are reasons we might want to talk explicitly about a technique or an exchange. There are reasons, and there are moments where we might want to use that intervention. Static drilling, there are reasons we might want to do that or might use that intervention, but none of them have to do with the direct development of skill. And there are other reasons, but skill acquisition it falls on the shortest end of it. You can get most of your learning done without ever using those other 2 interventions at all, not even a little bit.
Do you find the uptake of knowledge from this style of learning is different between people that have never done any jiu-jitsu versus those that have been corrupted, if you like, with other ways of learning?
Yeah, they have the hardest time unseeing what they've been told to look at. And that's the hardest time. Like, Noah is funny because he's only ever learned this way. And other people, what did you do? How'd you get that head and arm? And he says, I put your head and arm together. What do you mean? And he's like, how did you do it? And he's like, I used my hands to trap your head and arm together. Like, what are you asking me? Because that's how he learned to do it. And so he doesn't see things outside of their functional exchange. And he's very good at answering questions, like as far as like what he was looking at, what he felt, what he was thinking, because he's attuned to himself because he's only ever experienced his actions through the environment, his outcomes through the environment. He doesn't have a bunch of, Greg Souders techniques to remember. He only knows Noah. And so I think this really gives him a deeper understanding of why things happen to him.
Yeah, because I wonder if this is partly why some people resist to this quite a bit, because I read something once about movement patterns and that it takes, I don't know, I think 500 repetitions, somewhere around there to embed a movement pattern. But if you already have an incorrect movement pattern that you're then trying to unwind, it's like tenfold, it's like 5,000 repetitions to undo what you already think you know and then do it different, the correct way. And I wonder if that's why a lot of people are just like, I don't want to do this because of, the cup being full already.
Well, it is, because think about this. There is no such thing as a correct or incorrect movement. There isn't, because we only move relative to the tasks we're performing. And the way that we know that we're moving right is because we're producing the effect that we're looking for. You know what I mean? Like, the teacher's like, oh, what's proper squat technique? Well, it's the technique at which you can lift the bar before it folds you in half. If the bar folds you in half, your technique is wrong. If it doesn't, it's right. And so that's a hard thing to swallow because we're like, man, what about this angle? What about that angle? Some of the shit there's no metric for. So the best metric we have for anything being right or wrong is simply effective. Again, we can find a way to make it more nuanced, but if we don't start with first effective as being the initial measure of right, I don't think we understand anything.
But I think that's an interesting one with the squat thing, right? Because Danny and I are fitness coaches, and I've looked at like things like biomechanics, and there's obviously literature around, how to maximize strength in the body through certain biomechanics. And I also know, having coached people through movement, that some people, typically people that have done no sport, like just really struggle with like really basic movement patterns, just hinging correctly, just lunging correctly, all these things that, some of the literature deems are necessary to get through life, and trying to coach somebody to do a squat where it doesn't fold them in half or break their knees or whatever it is, it's sometimes really difficult without going, right, let me touch you. I'm going to put your, your bum here. Like, I'm going to move your hips this way, your shoulders this way. So without getting really specific with how they need to move their body to achieve a task, some people seem to really, really struggle. And despite, endless scenarios in verbal coaching, they never quite get it. And I know jiu-jitsu is different because it's contact. I think the point that I'm getting to is, do you ever find that people, despite the fact that they've got the freedom and the sort of natural intuition to move, just really struggle to learn this when you have to get a bit more focused in on coaching? Do you ever find that?
So it's a mistake to assume that this method doesn't require coaching. It's actually the opposite. This method requires a deep understanding of what you're doing. Because if I'm going to bring in an intervention, that means some different task, something I say, something I use to create a new behavior pattern. Not only do I have to understand the mechanics of the pattern that I'm trying to manipulate, but I also have to understand a second piece, which is rarely ever talked about, if ever talked about. And it's the origins of why movements like this even occur or happen in the first place. So I need to understand grappling at a very deep level in order for me to coach somebody into an effective movement solution. This is not a plug and play. This is not just press, start, and go. So I think the issue is people think all their babbling that they do is the proper intervention, but no one ever records themselves talking to hear how silly they actually sound. Like, have you ever, try. I'm not saying you, I've never heard you coach, so I have no idea how effective you are at it. But if you were to put a camera up, how many times do you say, oh, like this, or like here? Well, what is here to the body? When we get in a squat position and we feel the burden of the weight, the load we're carrying, does the mind say here? What happens to the mind and body relationship as it relates to trying to acquire that skill? Why would someone lean forward versus lean back? Why would someone keep their head up as to not keep their head up? Why would someone widen their hands versus shorten their hands? Why would someone point their toes forward rather than out? So there's so much you would have to know about just hinging at the hip and bending at the knees in order to really properly coach a squat. Most people just use their best guess in their own self as the guide. Well, I did this way once, so maybe I should do it that way. But very few people know anything about it. Like, if I were to ask you, what's the invariant feature of all squats? What would you say that it is?
The invariant feature.
The thing that never changes, no matter who squats in the world.
The feet are on the floor?
Maybe. I don't know anything about squatting. I was asking you.
Okay.
Well, so it's the hinge movement in the hip, isn't it?
So yeah, there's a knee bend, there's a hip hinge. Ideally you'd have your shoulders over your knees over your heels, your weight's down through your heels, your hips go back and down. You've got a neutral spine. So they're not invariable though, because people change them all the time, but that would be what I try to have somebody achieve.
Right. Well, then you think about what we'd have to know in order to really know. Like, even if you were like a squat coach and you paused at that question, that says something. Not about you. Again, I'm not judging you. Excuse me. Please don't misinterpret my words. But someone who knows something doesn't pause. They know it.
Yeah.
So I think that we have a lot more to do before we say this is going to equate to that. Because I think the system, that's the person interacting, doing a thing, is far more complex than words can do justice. So I think we have to be careful that if I show this technique in this way, that it's going to produce the result every time. You're a fool if you think that. You haven't been paying attention.
Yeah, and I think this is potentially another reason why people resist this as well, because we talked earlier about, obviously, as an individual, I have all this, all this stuff in my brain already that I might want to try and kind of work out. But also as a coach, everything you've said there sounds like it's very time intensive. Obviously, you've got a very deep understanding. The amount of time you must have spent creating these frameworks and these games and these tasks, it sounds like a lot. And I think a lot of people who, again, just regurgitate information, reinventing their coaching style to use this approach is going to be quite an undertaking, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is, again, there's no arrogance here when I say this. It took me 20 years, like 10 years of my own personal experience, like being out there, competing, going through injuries, trying to learn jiu-jitsu as a student, as an athlete, reading books and watching every DVD I could get my hands on, like everything to acquire this knowledge, my own experience, the historical record, everything. Then I have to translate my entire 10 years into a new group of people, which has taken me another 10 years. And I've been teaching 21 classes a week for the last 10 years and almost doing nothing else. Traveling to every tournament, watching everyone's videos, distilling jiu-jitsu down to the smallest thing that I could grasp. Not to mention listening to podcasts, watching videos, reading white papers, talking to subject matter experts, PhDs. I've read about 50 books in the last 2 years. My phone is filled with notes. I've got 2 notebooks filled front to back. I mean, I don't know what to tell anybody. Like, I didn't just wake up and be like, oh, that John Danaher video taught me everything I didn't know about jiu-jitsu, So I don't know why people think that we don't need deep expertise if we decide to take on the role of an expert. It requires a whole lifetime worth of effort.
Yeah, and mate, that's like incredible and testament to you. It's an insane amount of learning and dedication you've put into that. But I guess going back to your point a second ago, where if you don't have a deep enough understanding, how can you or should you be coaching? I mean, I think when you think about this is a way of coaching. How do people who have spent 20 years getting to a level they're at then reinvest all that time? And I think it's just, and this is what I'm just trying to grasp, because again, this is something that I'd love to understand more, but it feels like just, I don't know, picking up one of your DVDs or watching some of your YouTube channels is never going to give me even a crumb of enough information to actually construct a class or a practice to ever really be able to achieve this and train entirely in this style, at least.
Yeah, so really that's kind of what I've been trying to tell people. That's why I don't sell anything. That's why I don't have any DVDs. That's why when BJ Fanatics approached me multiple times, I said no. Because the thing is you're asking for a plug and play method that I know won't work. Like, I'm sorry, I'm a principled guy. Like, this shit sucks to try to learn. And so what I try to do instead is I try to give away a free framework to try to change your perception of what's happening. So if we look at what's actually going on when we entangle somebody, or when we grab a waist, or when we grab shoulders, this gives everybody access to it. If we all have access to a foundational framework that allows us to see what's actually going on, we can start understanding it through our own lens, and we can use our own understanding to create practice interventions that help our students acquire what we now know. But the way that we need to do this is by communicating with the live environment in real time, and we need to adjust accordingly. There is no curriculum. There is no template. There's only a way to look at what's happening and filtering things through it.
When you're actually coaching, when you're in the room, so you've obviously just explained there the amount of time you've spent, sort of understanding and creating some of these frameworks and concepts. When you're actually in the room in practice and you're working through these different scenarios, I mean, how do you see your role there, other than, like creating and explaining the task? Are you reading the room? Are you changing things on the fly? Or is there a very strict process that you go through in a session? How does that look? What's your role in the room during a practice?
So so here's the thing, and this is the hard part for me too, is that there is no general coaching process really. All coaching, I believe, is specific person to person. So the only way I could truly maximize my coaching ability would be to work with each individual on their own, in their own way, on their own terms, which is nearly impossible when you have 100 students, right? So how I see myself now is I'm a guide. So what I do is I create a practice that is rich in opportunities for action. And within this environment, I try to give people tasks to perform to help them see the effect of their actions. I give them a framework as a way to ask questions of themselves and of their environment to try to uncover why things might be happening, as a way to give themselves feedback for what they might want to do next. And so I'm there to try to facilitate this process. But again, by designing it and then by being there as a facilitator to answer questions, to guide people in new directions, to inspire them to see things differently. That's what I think my role is as a coach, you know? And so again, I try to be as present as possible and to interact in real time. And that's all I can do.
Again, I just keep thinking about why people wouldn't like this. And I think, again,
I could tell you. Think about it. Think about the amount of people. You could think about it. I like to use cooking because cooking, I've eaten food from Michelin star chefs, and when they even they toast bread and they hand it to you, and you bite into their toasted bread. It's the best toasted bread you've ever fucking had. You know what I mean? It could be something simple as just a piece of sourdough with a little bit of butter on it, but for some reason they understand it so well that when you bite that thing, you're like, I understand why you got that star and why I just paid $500 to bite into your bread. Right? So most people do not want to be a chef because what it took for that guy to understand the relationship between salt, oil, vinegar, or acid and protein is too much for most people. So what most people do is they buy a recipe book. Now, when people buy a recipe book, you really have three types of people to buy the recipe book. The people that buy the recipe book because they thought they wanted to cook, they try it once, don't like it, put it back on the shelf. That's most consumers. Then you have the second person who tries to do the recipe, but they kind of suck at it, but it's enough to give them a meal. And the third type is they're going to work hard. They're going to make pretty decent recipes, but they really don't want to be cooks. But they can cook themselves dinner every night by using the guide of the book. But they'll never understand what the Michelin star chef understands. And so most people have no interest in being the thing that they say they're setting out to be. It's too hard. Most people want Netflix. They want a weekend experience. They want a quick getaway. They want to feel like the weekend warrior because they once did it when they were a kid. It sounds cynical, but I haven't experienced much else.
Yeah, and I wonder as well if it's less sexy, isn't it? It's less sellable. So I think when you can show these really cool fancy techniques and all that sort of stuff, it's quite easy to sell, isn't it? Whereas if you're just going, well, I'm going to create these scenarios and these games for you, and you're going to actually do the work.
For sure. I mean, think about it. Who's our biggest consumer? Who's the biggest consumer of information in our sphere?
Well, white belts.
Yeah, beginners.
Yeah, white belts, yeah.
And so most of the things we share are to maximize their buying potential. So read any book on sales and you'll understand our community very quickly. We need to create an emotional environment because people purchase and interact based on their emotions. We need to make sure that that emotional interaction is high in impact, meaning it hits them where they need it. And then we repeat it continuously to keep them buying. So just watch any piece of content. You'll see all three of those things present. The constraints of what it means to get $1 from the ignorant is guiding our community at large. Most communities.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah, it's consumerism, isn't it? It's exactly what they need to do to sell stuff. I get that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's I do a little bit of coaching, and I'm still learning all the time, or attempting to. If I wanted to start implementing this a little bit, like where would I start? Because again, there's 10 years of information that I need to try and get through to really grasp it, which is probably not going to be the case. But what can people do if they want to, either as a coach or maybe for their own self-learning, start implementing more of, or start reading more of, or whatever it is to start moving in this direction?
So I think the first is really we just need to do more live work. We need to be touching and grabbing bodies more often. We need to engage in that playful, competitive interaction that is the base of our sport, and we need to do that most of the time. I think the second thing is we need to know how to receive the feedback given from trial and error. So most of the feedback a new student or coach needs is happening right there in front of you. Did it work? Did it not work? Why? What happened? So if we can sort of attune and grasp that little moment, we can see a lot of what we might need to do differently, or at least guess at what we might need to do differently. And then I guess we just need to understand grappling a little bit more deeply than just as a series of memorized techniques. We have to understand why the body engages this way and why angles are the way they are, why grips always end up in the same places that they always do. So we need to sort of see what's happening foundationally when two bodies struggle towards strangulation and breaking.
Okay, some more love training. We can do that. And in regard to the actual sort of the games, I think you just said you don't really sell anything, but I feel like that's obviously a really key component, right? Because if you've got someone who's attempting to teach in this way, but their games or their tasks don't make any sense, or maybe there's no continuity with them, then it's not going to be helpful. Like where can I start to understand how I can create those sort of games and make sure they're effective, and how do I piece them together?
Okay, so the key feature that I've been trying to get everyone to sort of focus on and try to understand, because it helped me the most, was this idea of invariance. And this is what I learned from ecological dynamics, ecological psychology. And it's this idea that when we perceive the world and we try to act upon it, we tend to act around the things that don't change. When a system changes too much, it becomes chaotic and hard to predict, hard to read, hard to prospect from. But within environments, there's always things that really seem to be stable. And that's what we anchor ourselves to. So if I want to pass the guard, for example, and I'm looking at ways to do it, what is something that never changes when we pass legs, right? And we focus our training and our task focuses on doing those things. Like the example I gave earlier, top player, keep the feet off of you. There is no guard pass that happened where the feet were on us. We had to get the feet off of us first, whether we did it by front flipping over our opponent or whether we did it by grabbing a hold of the feet and keeping them off. Both are interventions that work. So if we guide all of our effects towards the invariant features that are present in the environment, within task, about the individual, I think our practice become more sound and salient.
I'm going to watch back my own podcast several times, I think, to try and understand this.
Well, do you mind if we talk about this a little bit more? So, because this is something I would really, really want to help people see more clearly. Because I think once you see it, you're good to go. I think you'll start to understand.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. I think we're at a point where we're currently, what's the term, like subconsciously incompetent. So we're not entirely sure all the best questions to ask you right now to get the best information out. So speak freely. The floor is yours. Tell us anything you want.
Okay, so let's have a conversation real quick. Let's see this. Let's say arm locks. Okay, let's say we're new students. You guys are coaches, and we want to teach a new student how to arm lock. And let's say we're going to start them with a grip fight from the mounted position. If I want to start to grab arms as the top player against a resisting opponent, so I can start building in the conditions of getting them to move into, let's say, the arm lock breaking position or traditional head over the leg over the head, leg over the body, perpendicular aligned arm lock. What's one of the first things we might want to do, either for ourselves or we want to have a new player start to do from the mounted position, again, to create the conditions that make it possible?
Start to isolate the arm.
Okay, so we know that's what we need to do. So forget isolate the arm. If you looked at a new person day one, say, go ahead, go and isolate that arm. They'd be like, what? What the hell does isolation mean? What's something we can tell somebody to do where we don't have to refer to like knowledge? Like you know it. So what do you tell somebody without knowledge to help them start to go towards an end that you know is effective?
Tell them to grab the arm and not let the person attach it to their body.
Okay, let's be more specific. Where would you want them to grab the arm to maximize their effect towards that end?
The wrist.
Oh, great.
Yeah, grab the wrist.
Top player, grab a hold of your partner's wrists, keep a hold of them. Either you have one or you have both, it doesn't matter. So 2-on-1 or 1v1, it does not matter. But let's make it deeper. What would you might want them to do as the coach with those hands to make arm locks more available?
As the top player?
Yep, as the top player, yep.
I don't know, put pressure on them to like...
Where? Well, the grabbing is pressure.
What do you mean? So like, if you were to put... I'd want to like smother them to make it like, so they panic a little bit to push their arms out.
Okay. There's the answer. So we know that we need those arms to move in a specific way. So again, you jumped away from the wrist thing, which is fine. And you said, okay, I'm going to smother you to get your arms to move. But either way, we need arms to move. Whether I grab the wrists and move them, or I smother you and get you to move them, those arms need to move. But where do they need to move to? Relative to what?
I guess away from the body towards the head.
Good. Why?
Because they're weaker there?
They are, but we're trying to move our bodies from the mount to where?
To like an S
Yeah.
mount
To
position.
the S mount, to the arm lock breaking position. What's in the way?
His arm.
Their arms.
The arms. Yeah. So did you see? Now we're starting to understand what we need to be doing. I need to move arms because I can't move from sitting on top of you to being perpendicular on top of you with the arms in the way. So I've got to get those arms to move. One intervention would be, okay, I'm going to start moving arms. I think grabbing the wrist might be the best place to move them. Well, I need you to move your arms. I'm going to smother your ass and get you to move them. Okay, so we have a piece of an answer. We have something we can work with. And then if we go out and do that, we can now see the effect of our actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's still something in there that we always have to do. So we got to get the arms to move, and we got to get them away from the body. But what's ultimately going to be the thing that says I can now go from covering your hips with my legs to covering your shoulders with my legs in a perpendicular fashion? What is the one invariant thing that must happen for me as the top player to be able to make that transition? There's only one thing. Assuming we're holding them down. Like, just assume we're able to keep them on the floor. And even if they move, we can still do it.
Is it making sure their arms don't go back to where they started?
Relative to what? That's right. Relative to what?
Oh, fuck, that was like, yeah. So,
no,
yeah.
see,
But
this is what I'm saying. This is foundational. This is not deep shit. We're talking about day one, go from mount to go from arm lock. And I'm not trying to embarrass you guys. I'm just trying. I'm sorry if I feel like I'm being contradictory or anything. I'm just trying to say that. See how hard a basic thing is, and what happens is we think if I show you some silly process of arm lock, I'm going to get you there. But I'm asking you guys is what's the one thing that never changes? If I want to go from one thing to another thing, which we all done arm locks, we all know what an arm lock is. How come we can't say what we need to do?
I think we're just not used to putting it into words.
yeah, that's what I was about to say. So like in my head, I know what we need to do. Yeah.
Okay, look inside your head. What is that image telling you need to do?
So
look at that thing.
Just telling me to isolate his arm, to get under his elbows, to get his head. Yeah. So I need to get his under his elbows. I need to get his arm up. Do you know what I mean? And then I'd sit up into that S sort of mount, and then I'd throw my leg. That's what I'm thinking in my head. But when you're saying like, what's the relative part of this and that, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know, like questioning myself. You know what I mean?
Right. And so right now I'm talking about just the analysis of an arm lock. I'm not talking about like what a coach. I'm trying to get to what a coach would need to say.
Yeah.
But if we don't understand the relationship between my actions as the top player and what I need to do to the bottom player to create an outcome, then what do I really know? And if I don't know that explicitly, how the hell would I guide my student towards a solution if I didn't know what that is? And so the way we do that is through invariance. So the invariant feature of the body that allows me, the top player, to move from the hips to the shoulders, from parallel to perpendicular, is manipulation of my partner's elbow. If the hands and elbow are what protect the line to my partner's shoulders. Mm-hmm. So if I can't move the hands and elbow out of the way, I cannot get to my partner's shoulders. And so me as the coach would then design practice to do one of two things: to teach the student how to maintain a type of connection that manipulated the elbow, or to create situations where the elbow's moved so that I could go from one position to another. And so, again, our understanding must be centered around the things that never change. Because no matter what technique someone shows you, no matter what the step-by-step process is, it'll have something to do with moving hands and elbows so I can make a transition from parallel to perpendicular, from hips to shoulders.
Do you explain this to them, if that makes sense? Like, I understand what you're saying when you're live rolling, but do you say to them, like, this is what you need to do? Or do you just say this is the scenario and they've got to find that out for themselves?
Well, no. So basically, one thing that people accuse me of, or this method of, is reinventing the wheel. And now we're not actually doing that. What we're doing is we're taking all of our knowledge and we're starting the student where we are now. So if I know that it's manipulation of the elbow that helps me go from one position to another, then we start new learners around situations where they get to manipulate the elbow. So because we already know that the solution is going to be within that space, so we put them in that space because we know that it's going to help achieve these outcomes. So
but do they know that?
Yes, they
That's
will
what
have
my
to
point
know
is.
it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, do they know what the outcome?
They don't have to know what I just told you. So for example, the first round could be just, I need you to get your partner's elbow to touch their head. So we would start them in a situation or a grip that would allow that to happen. And we would say, okay, we're going to use our arms to make our partner's elbow touch their head. Done. That's what they're going to train right now because that's the problem. They don't know. They have no exposure to. So we expose them to that problem so they can start trying to solve it because that problem will be necessary in the grand scheme of things. If I don't develop a relationship with my ability to move my partner's arms from this position, I'll never be able to reach this outcome ever. So we give them opportunities to manipulate arms to deepen their relationship with the manipulation of arms.
But wouldn't it be easier just to say to them, you need to get under their elbows. You need to do Gordon Ryan talked about like pushing his hands away from, creep your hand, but like away from the body. I used to try and lift it up, like little details like that. Again, I understand exactly what you're saying, but what wouldn't that, in that scenario, wouldn't it be quicker just to say, this is a really good way to get his arm up?
So let's say I give you a specific solution. I use Gordon Ryan, for example. Who knows this? No matter what he tells you, he knows this because he does them. So if I put my hand under your elbow, I tell him, I want you to walk your fingers up, right? And I take a guy who's 145 pounds and I put him with you. Do you think walking his fingers up is going to stop you from pinning your elbows to your side? No, I know it won't. What if we're talking about a guy whose arms are like noodles because he's been playing on a computer his whole life and he's never once used his arms for anything other than clicking his mouse? He's not moving your arms. So one detail might be the groundbreaking piece of information for one person, it will be literally useless for another. So what is something that we need to do as all people in order to do this? We need to move elbows. So we don't start with the specifics. We start with the general, I want you to start here and take his elbow and move it here any way that you can. This gives you the freedom to experience it for you. And it lets you in your own current capacity to start trying to reach those outcomes. And then we can change the intervention specifically or generally if we need to.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that. I was just thinking like that scenario though of a 145-pound man. Like
I feel like he's not getting your elbows up to your head anyway.
That's what I mean. Like that in that scenario, like they're not going to get my elbows up if I don't want them to anyway.
That's not true. What happens if you turn real hard and rather than moving your elbows, he gets behind them. So now he doesn't have to move them because you moved them for him. This is what little guys learn how to do. They learn how to move relative to you rather than moving you. This is why small people can still perform effective action against bigger, stronger people. It's because they develop a relationship not with movement of the object, but moving relative to the object. They're constrained by their inability to actually manipulate the bigger, stronger player, so they figure out movement solutions where they don't have to move you, but learn how to move themselves.
So in that movement pattern though, would they be allowed, say like I did do a big bridge, or I don't know, so it's just a scenario like where I done a big bridge, and then they took my back or something like that. Would that then be allowed to carry on? And that would just be the start of the ecological like training? Yeah, if that makes sense.
For sure. So that would be up to the coach, right? So the coach wants to design a constraint or a situation that's rich enough in information or has many affordances or many opportunities for action as a way to help people find out a myriad of movement solutions. So we want to make sure that we have both the possibility to focus on moving the object, but also focusing on moving relative to the object. If those two things aren't present in that training system or that training block, then it might be overly constrained for a certain type of person, i.e. small guy with big guy. So again, the only way that we can know this is if we know our medium and we know that the context is what's controlling the outcome of the interaction. So if we don't know those two things, we're not going to know how to manipulate the environment to help learning happen. We're gonna throw shit at the wall until we hope something sticks.
I'm just trying to get it like clear in my head, if you know what I mean, because I understand completely what you're saying, and I'm again like Paul, I'm super interested in actually learning like this. You know, it sounds really exciting, and it sounds way more fun than just drilling.
Well, no, and your question is actually really good. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm not respecting the question.
No, not at all. No, yeah, no. I just want to like, I really want to kind of get it clear in my head. And I feel like I understand what you're kind of saying. Like every individual person is very different when they're doing jiu-jitsu. And I find that. So body type, strength, flexibility, all that type of stuff, we talk about it a lot. And I imagine, finding your own way to do certain movement patterns is definitely better, isn't it?
Yes.
It's definitely going to be better. You're going to be advantageous, isn't you?
When I say own way, I don't mean discovering it from its original origins, because that's the whole historical account. Like from John, let's say John Danaher to now, there's a lot of things that John Danaher exposed the world to that we weren't doing as a whole group until he told us about it, right? So we don't have to learn leg locks pre 2014. John Danaher created a model for us to look at to see how leg locks could happen. So what we do is we take that historical record and we start from somewhere in that space of the information that was learned, and then we start learning it again. So we don't want, there are things that we must do, and that's the centering our focus around invariance. We want to focus on things that we know produce physically certain and consistent outcomes, and then we branch out from there.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. So you'd start, say, like in 50-50 and then work from there. Is that what you're trying to say?
That would be a way, or really just with inside position, for example. So if we understand that getting in between the limbs creates a path to the base joint, and we know that, so we can start new learners with starting with their limbs in between other players' limbs to reach specific outcomes. So because we know that those two things are connected relationally, so we put them there so they can experience that relationship between the position they start in and the position they're ending in.
So if we're looking at like more advanced grapplers, even professional grapplers, and they wanted to do the ecological approach, when you're looking at like, I've seen recently you had like a stupid spat with Owen O'Flanagan talking about you can't get this good at leg locking without drilling these sort of moves, and then it's like been a bit back and forth and all that bollocks. But I was just like trying to think about like if you are, I don't know, like a top end grappler and you want those like finer details, would you still say like you would always have to, starting 50-50, starting a honey hole, whichever sort of leg lock position you would start in, and then just work through those moves and see where you end up?
Well, see, here's what's fascinating. Owen, in his own words, talked about how he acquired those skills or what he thinks the best intervention would be. And his words were, we start in this little bit and we see where we struggle. Within this little bit, if we find somewhere we struggle, we put ourselves back in this little bit and we struggle there until we figure it out. And we put ourselves in this little bit and we struggle there until we figure it out. So he's admitting to you that the way he acquired the skill that he's now selling you on his DVD was done through trial and error and through interaction with the live environment. Isn't that funny? How strange is it that someone tells you, this is how I acquired something, and they sell you a DVD in opposition to what they just told you they did? That's weird. And nobody flinches. You know what I mean? Everyone's like, oh, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. But at the same time, isn't like, again, with like a DVD, it's like, isn't he doing the hard work for us, if that makes sense? Like, aren't I like sidestepping some of that?
No, he's doing the hard work to become an athlete. He doesn't know how to coach. So he hasn't done the hard coaching work. He doesn't know what verbal interventions create what outcomes. He knows that if I use trial and error and train a whole bunch because I'm a young, passionate, strong grappler who's trying to be good, that you get better. And he's proven that. He's proven that if you roll a lot and you care about what you do and you try real fucking hard, you can be good. I mean, he's one of Europe's top grapplers. Like,
oh yeah, he's great, isn't he?
There's no arguing that. He put in the work to be as skillful at the belly up open guard as he is. What I'm saying, he doesn't know shit about coaching. And that's fine. He's not supposed to. He's not supposed to.
Not really. He's an athlete who does a bit of coaching.
That's right.
He's not the same
and he does good at his job. He's good at his job. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it's definitely a different thing, isn't it? Coaching to being,
it's a completely
athlete,
different
you know
thing.
what I mean? We're both coaches, like we said. And
my beef wasn't that he's good at jiu-jitsu or not. We clearly see. I watch him all the time. I think he's great. The way he transitions from seated to going up, and how he mixes laying belly up, threatening legs, and coming up is fantastic. You could learn a lot from watching him grapple, but you can put him on mute, and you'll probably learn more. That's all.
Do you again, like from your ecological approach, do you watch grappling a lot to like, would you encourage your students to watch a lot of grappling to like see the movement patterns and seeing what other people are doing?
Absolutely. Watching other people and mimicking what you think you see is part of how humans learn. This is how we engage with our environment. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with hearing people's opinions and all that stuff. It informs us on what we might want to do next. I think it's all healthy and good shit. So yeah, I watch tons of grappling. My students watch tons of grappling. We talk about the stuff we watch. We talk about the things we see. Yeah, man. Don't stop doing that. All I'm saying is that when we train, It should be all live. It should be unscripted. It should be uncooperative. And the methods for informational conveyance, or what we say to our students, needs to be fixed, because what we're doing now is a very poor way to acquire skill.
Yeah, I get it. Again, it's really cool, and I completely understand what you're saying, because again, I train like that quite a lot, so I completely get it. I'm just thinking from like a devil's advocate point of view of just trying to understand the other side a little bit of where people are like, some people are like complete opposite, aren't they? Some people are like, you pretty much drill like 80% of the time,
Mate, I think though, a lot of it is because we're in the age of selling instructionals. I think
cash cows, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Greg's right. I think most of these people, I've seen John Danaher and Gordon's instructionals. They're like 7 hours long of very specific step-by-step stuff. But you know that they acquire that information through hours and hours on the mats.
Yeah.
And problem solving, and then they box it up and they obviously sell it. And I think that's the issue. I think a lot of people aren't going to admit to that necessarily because of selling instructions.
It is all mat time. It is 100% all mat time. In 2 years, I've probably done four years worth of mat time compared to most people, because and that's the truth. People go on like years trained, so that you say like, oh, you've been trained 2 years, but realistically, I've probably trained 4 or 5 years to a regular hobbyist. Even
100%.
though I am kind of a hobbyist, but I train once or twice a day on and off, for 2.5 years. So it's like, that's way more than most people train in maybe 3 or 4 years,
Yeah, I think it's that desire it is that you said it earlier, that letting other people do the hard work so you can shortcut it. I think it's people's desire to get to an outcome without putting the work in and taking shortcuts. And with any endeavor, I guess, that involves skill acquisition and learning, it's just, it's just not the case, is it?
Well, the thing is that they're actually, the shortcut's the lie. That's what they're selling you. So there is no shortcut. Even if we have a historical record for what should happen, and we know that each generation is better performing than the previous generation, that's true. That's a fact. But it's not because they bought someone's DVD and studied it. It's literally because the coaches that were once athletes that learned how to coach are giving students an opportunity to perform in a new environment where things are known about what we might want to be searching for to create these outcomes. And so that's recycled. And so we are using the historical record. And that's absolutely true. And that's what's helping us spring forward. But the person doing the work still has to do the work. It's just they're doing it in a different place, right? And this is like the big contradiction that nobody seems to hear. And again, I'm not calling John Danaher out specifically, but he says a person needs knowledge to start learning. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. If we needed knowledge to start learning, who learned the first thing? Where did he get the knowledge from? The first person to ever grab 2 legs and slam someone on the ground, he did it based on his own personal interaction with what was happening. And then if it was successful, maybe he told somebody about it. Humans fall real easy if you grab both legs. And then now a culture was built around it, a training methodology was built around it. Everyone started finding how many different ways they can grab 2 legs and make someone fall. Now we have historical record for how we can interact with 2 legs to create outcomes, all predicated on a moment where no knowledge was actually required. So what are we really saying?
Yeah, I get it. Well, again, John's obviously like great in what he does, clearly, obviously with the grapplers he's producing. But again, that it doesn't convey to the average hobbyist. And I think that's your point more than anything. It's like what they're doing is hours and hours and hours on the mats. And more so than anything is, it's specific training, blah, 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 live rolling. They do hours and hours of live rolling as well as their specific training. So I completely get what you're saying. If you're buying an instructional of outside Ashi or 50-50 or something, how many hours are you going to put into that position to then benefit from that instructional? You're going to have, it's not going to work.
Think about this craziness. You watch a DVD about leg locks for 8 hours to learn that your feet either go outside, inside, or mixed. And you put your partner's leg on either one side of your center line or the other. We use the rotation of ourselves or our partner shared to gain heel exposure. I just saved you $400. So what you need to do is you need to put yourself in one of these 3 possible solutions. Feet outside, feet inside, feet mixed. Put the leg on one side or the other. Try to stay connected, move your partner's legs, try to get your false grip. Start with the false grip, try to keep your false grip. Try to keep your hands connected. Have your partner try to pull the leg out. Have your partner try to stand up. Have your partner try to rotate. all while staying in one of these three positions, moving a leg to one side or the other and capturing the toes. You know everything you need to know to start learning how to break people's legs. And with that, just that little information, if you start developing the skills as I just outlined them, you will break most people's legs that train, because most people don't train beyond a blue belt level anyway. So you got yourself the secret sauce to heel hook everybody. Don't spend any money. It's right there in front of you. Just watch tournament matches. You'll see it.
Just for the record, I've never bought a DVD because I don't like them.
You've watched a couple though. You've watched a couple.
I'll tell you what I watched. I watched Dean Lister's half guide thing because I love a bit of half guide, and that was actually pretty good.
But even when we've watched some of Gordon Ryan's stuff together, but even when we watched it for, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, and then right, let's just get on the mat, get in the position, and start working from there.
Yeah, it wasn't like to consume everything. It was more like, right, we're going to start from this pin position, wasn't it? And then we took in turns pinning and then trying to get out from what he had said. So it's yeah.
Well, the thing is like, if you're not trained to listen to information, sometimes we miss it. So people who are critical thinkers like John Danaher, he's very well trained in speaking and argument and philosophical thought. And most people aren't even nearly as close to his trained ability to do that. And so when they read it, when they get involved in his information, they don't know how to listen to him. And so what the most interesting thing that I found about Danaher, because I watched his stuff, is that he gives you the entire 8 hours in the first like 5 to 20 minute speech he gives in the beginning. And then everything else he shows is a bunch of different ways to do those 4 things that he talked about in the beginning. And so it's 8 hours of method predicated on 5 to 20 minutes of principle. And so if we're just trained to listen to principle, you don't have to waste the 8 hours of the other stuff, because it's almost meaningless, because he's really just showing the same thing over and over and over again. He's just showing it with variation.
Greg, I know you've got to go in a second, mate, but that's been really good conversation. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah,
I think we're going to go away and play around with it, and we'll definitely come back with questions.
Yeah.
I know you've got a couple of guys competing at the Worlds, which is why you're shooting off in a second to catch a plane. Who have you got competing? Do you want to tell us about that real quick?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got a bunch of our developmental guys. So none of the black belts are out there. So Gav and D are taking a break. Actually, Gavin's getting married this weekend, so I'm literally going to be flying out, getting a red eye back on Saturday, and driving right out to his wedding. So the black belts won't be there, but we have Romero, Noah, Sid, Dominique, new member Felipe, Brian Guevara, Old Bread, Josh, one of our older guys, 38 years old, who's only trained with the CLA. He's actually a basketball coach too, who uses CLA in his basketball stuff. So a bunch of the guys, sorry if I didn't name any of you fellas if you listen to this, but a bunch of our developmental guys are going out there, and so it'll be fun. Hopefully we take some world titles.
Amazing, mate. Good luck.
Yeah, for sure. And if, I know you don't do instructionals, but if somebody wanted to reach out and sort of consult with you, and what's the best way to get hold of you? Oh yeah, so everyone should know at GD Souders is the best way to get a hold of me. I use Instagram for all my messaging and stuff, so try your best to reach out to me. Now I'm starting to be picky who I message back, because I was spending 8 hours a day messaging, and now I've kind of been ignoring it a little bit. I'm only going to respond to serious people. So if you have a serious inquiry and a serious question, I'm more than happy to engage with you. I do hour-long consultation calls if you want it. I do 20-minute free ones to assess you if you need it, and let you talk to me to see if you actually enjoy talking to me. I allow everyone to come visit for free. Everyone can come to my gym, try it out, talk to me in person. Doesn't matter. I don't charge for that. So yeah, at GD Souders, or follow us at Standard Jiu Jitsu if you want to chit chat with me. Yeah, awesome. And I'd suggest our audience check out your YouTube channel as well. You've got some examples on there of your sessions, which are great. Yeah, so we have the Standard Jiu Jitsu YouTube channel. My editor has been away for a while, but we're trying to get him back on board to try to make some new content. We've been out of the content game for like six months now, so we're going to try to do that again. But yeah, so if anything I can help you with, anyone who's listening, like seriously, reach out. I do seminars now. Like again, if you want me to come to you, that's me doing work, so I do charge for that. But I enjoy doing seminars, and I do like to share my information live with people. So I would love to do that for you if you want it. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for coming on, Greg. Good to meet you, my man. Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys so much for the platform and let me speak again. I do appreciate it. I'm sorry if I wasn't able to convey my message clearly, but again, if we ever talk again, I'll do my best or better to try to get you what you guys need. No, it's great, mate. Yeah.